And the Jamboseum is quite thankful to our benefactors, Rick Braga, ISCO, Chris Jensen, Paul Kramer, Malcolm Rosenthal, Doug Schwab, and Russell Smart for making this possible. In 1917, the President of the United States was Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson contacted the Boy Scouts of America and said, you know, I've got a war to pay for, and I really am planning to pay for half of it with war bonds. Can the Boy Scouts actually step up and sell war bonds? And Boy Scouts of America said absolutely. And I think the President of the United States, he expected us to sell about $1 billion in war bonds at net present value in today's dollars. Well, it turned out and we sold $8 billion. Far outperformed any expectation, either by ourselves or others. And that's because a lot of individual scouts had really stepped up to do amazing things. As an example, here we have Heber Lee Mosby from Clarksburg, West Virginia. Now Heber was a 15-year-old scout who decided to go to the 2 factories in Clarksburg to sell the war bonds to those factories. He spent the 4 weeks composing his 4-minute speech. And he went into those 2 factories, and in fact, he sold a total of $8 million in bonds. He came in second in the nation, and for his hard work, and the Livingston Medal, the Silver Livingston Medal, was awarded to him by the President of the Boy Scouts of America. An amazing feat for a young man. We did the same kinds of things that we did in World War I, also in World War II. But there was a large number of things added to our list because the President of the United States had been an assistant scoutmaster and also the president of a major council. So he knew what scouts could do. We did amazing things. We planted crops. We gathered scrap paper, scrap rubber, and scrap aluminum. We raised money. We served as the human internet. We did all those kinds of things, but the most important thing we did was about half of the soldiers and sailors in World War II, in fact, had been scouts, and many of them died in combat. And the Boy Scouts of America created this plaque to commemorate any scout who died in service to his nation. This one belongs to a boy from Jonestown, Pennsylvania. Now that is service to a nation at war. We also do another kind of service, and that is service to the land. In 1910, we had a Chief Scout Forester named Gifford Pinchot, and he was a very well-known conservationist, but he was also the head of the Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture. In 1910, we had only 11 points to the Scout Law. And there was a debate within Scouting as to what the 12th point should be. There was a part of the Scouting wanted it to be around religion, and the other part wanted it around conservation. And religion won out. A Scout is Reverend is now the 12th point of the Scout Law, but it was almost conservation, which shows that conservation is deep in the DNA of Scouting. And at the epitome, the apex of conservation achievement is the Hornaday Award. Dr. William Hornaday established a fund to recognize people who had done outstanding work in conservation. And from 1922 to 1940, they had awarded about 22 medals. In 1940, we went to the fund, we said we'd like to have a medal for scouts. And they agreed, but we would nominate and they would approve. We nominated 25 people over the time period of 1941 to 1949, but only 4 were picked. And this is the first one, belonged to Frank Ritter from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He was an Eagle Scout. And this is the 4th one of the 4, and Gerard Gauthier from Manville, Rhode Island. It's difficult to tell you exactly what they did to earn this extraordinary award, but we can tell you what the person had done to earn the award that was lesser, the gold badge. And this was David B. Cook. He was the chief forester of the state of New York. Had done all of the seminal work on how you manage a forest in order to have maximize the and the viability of species. He was a very big deal, a very famous guy, and yet he only won the gold badge. So you can only imagine how that played through. In 1949, we decided to change it to be completely controlled by the Boy Scouts of America, and so we established the modern day Hornaday. In 1952, they awarded 5 of the Hornaday medals to the Scouts, and one of them was a member of our staff, Paul Kramer. He was an original recipient of the original Hornaday. We continue to do some very important work in conservation. In 1954, the President of the United States asked us to raise conservation higher up on the agenda. So councils across the country held a multitude of events around conservation. Conservation was the watchword in 1954. We even licensed the use of Smokey Bear as a logo. We also did a lot of work after Earth Day in 1971 with Project SOAR, or Save Our American Resources. But the most important thing that I want to point out is our work at AeroCorps 5 in 2008. We went to the Forest Service, the Aero did, and asked if they could do some trail remediation and trail repair in the National Forest. Forest Service agreed, and we spent 280,000 volunteer hours in that single year doing repair in 5 of the National Forest. It was the single largest conservation effort done since the Depression and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Also for Summit, when we decided to come here to Summit, we did a good turn for our national park neighbor, and we spent 80,000 hours to complete some trail repair there. So conservation has been a part of our DNA. A third area of service is in keeping Americans safe. And it surprises most people to know that over half of the recipients of the Medal of Honor for saving life have been under the age of 15. And many of them have been 12 and 13 years old. Well, it's hard to imagine how a 12-year-old would have the skill set to be able to do a saving of life. It turns out that the most important attribute in receiving the Medal of Honor is a person who simply saw a need and took action. It may not have been the most elegant solution, the most efficient, or even the safest solution, but they took action to respond to a person in need. And the Medal of Honor is at the apex of how we help to keep Americans safe. A man came into our exhibit a few days ago, the only person who had earned both the Hornaday Medal and the Medal of Honor. And he had received the Medal of Honor a couple years ago, where he saved 2 men from a burning welding truck, and after having pulled out the second one, the truck exploded. So it was in the nick of time. He received the Medal of Honor but he had it with cross palms. And when I asked him, I said, "What was going through your mind when you saw in the situation?" He said, "These 2 guys would have died if I hadn't worked. I had to do something," and that becomes the critical element in being prepared to be able to help keep Americans safe. We've done a number of things to prepare ourselves, and at the core of that preparation is our relationship with the Red Cross, which has been going on for a long time. We began our relationship in 1911. They are the ones who certified all of the lifeguards at the beginning of scouting, and they wrote the rules for swimming merit badge. They wrote all the rules for life-saving merit badge for all of the waterfront safety, and also the emergency first aid and the other first aid requirements. We have worked with them, hand in glove since then. We've also been very helpful to them and raised a lot of money for the Red Cross, as well as been side by side with them during the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. Another way that we help to ensure that we keep Americans safe is we're prepared for disasters. We have been the first responder for many, many, many disasters and emergencies. The Knickerbocker Theater fire in 1922, the floods in 1921, and the hurricanes in 23 and 27. We've been at the point of the spear in response. And because we were being called on so much, the Boy Scouts of America created an entire program to train senior scouts on how to be excellently trained for emergency response. When you got to be a Explorer Emergency Service Unit crewman, you had the same skill set as an EMT or a fireman. Another way we've been called on for service is in the area of citizen servants. And again, another two presidents, President Truman and Eisenhower, called on us to help to get out the vote. So in 52, in 56, and in 1960, we promoted voting quite strongly. We hung door hangers, 30 million of them each of those 3 years. We had parades of scouts, promoting voting. It was actually a big effort over that decade. And in fact, the percentage of citizens that had voted in that decade, it actually climbed quite drastically. I think part because of the efforts of the Boy Scouting. But a thing that I think is a very interesting thing about helping our civic responsibility is in 1913, we had a group of 1,400 scouts who had gone to Washington to participate in the inaugural of President Wilson. They were out the day before trying to survey the parade route. They were going to do crowd control and other kinds of things. And there was a parade going on. It was the women's suffrage movement was having a parade. There were 5,000 women. Some were on foot and some were in buggies and some were on horseback. And they were parading to promote having women have the right to vote. There was a large crowd, and there were a number of people in that crowd were not in favor of having women vote, so they decided to try to disrupt the parade. They crushed in on the parade. A number of women were hurt, and the scouts who were there for a completely different purpose, they stepped in, they did crowd control and moved the crowd back. They gave first aid to the women, and the suffrage movement was so grateful for what they did that they actually had struck this suffrage medal for all the participants. Again, an example of scouts responding to a need. We also had a request from President Eisenhower to increase the awareness of citizenship and the citizenship skills of young people. So we established a program called Citizens Now conferences for Explorer Scouts. They were held at college campuses all over the country in the 50s, and hundreds of thousands of Explorer Scouts participated. But the most interesting one was actually at West Point, because they went past the 5-year period that we had and this in place, and they did it for 10 years, and it morphed into what's now called the West Point Jamboree, which has been going on for 35 years. Let me introduce you to a young man from Brooklyn. His name is Billy Waller, and Billy is the third recipient of the Honor Medal. In 1912, the Boy Scouts of America decided that they were going to have Billy be the person who greeted Baden-Powell when Baden-Powell came over from England to inspect scouting to make sure we were doing it right. And so Billy was on the dock when the Baden-Powell came off the ship. He had a letter from President Taft welcoming Baden-Powell. And this was a picture that was in every newspaper in the country, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because Billy Waller was here, and off to the left of him were the entire uniformed Troop 1 of Oceanside, New York. That troop was chosen to be the honor guard for Baden-Powell because they were the only troop that had complete uniforms. Baden-Powell took his time going down the dock, talking to each scout, especially the first one who was the senior patroller, a tall young man in uniform. They actually talked for about 15 minutes. And he went all the way down, about 20 scouts talked to each one of them, and then he went up to see the dignitaries. The next day, Baden-Powell goes to the national office of the BSA, which was in Park Avenue in New York City, and he meets with Daniel Carter Beard, with Ernest Thompson Seton, and James West, three of the founders of Scouting. The four of them together formulated the plan for how to do the first Eagle Scout border review. They called it a National Court of Honor. They planned exactly how deep to ask questions, who was going to participate, etc. When they were all done, they called in the candidate, and the candidate walked in, and Baden-Powell was shocked, and the candidate was shocked, because that was the same boy who was standing on the pier as the senior patrol leader of Troop 1. His name was Arthur Eldred, became the first Eagle Scout. He participated in a 4.5 hour border review, grilling, and later in life he said it was by far the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life. Another thing that we did, which is really quite interesting, is that we served as a service corps for the 1945 United Nations Conference. The countries of the world came together to formulate the United Nations Charter. The Boy Scouts of America served as the service corps for that, and it did add a lot to the overall tenor of cooperation among the countries. But a very interesting story is Mackinac Island Service Corps. And the island is a resort island off the coast of Michigan, and it's owned by the state of Michigan. And Michigan wanted to have a service corps of scouts to help to make the visit more pleasurable for all the people who came. So he organized the first service corps in 1929, all Eagle Scouts. This is actually a picture of that service corps. And if you look at the guy who's holding the flag, he's a senior patrol leader. He grew up to be a president. His name is Gerald Ford. And in later life, when he was asked the most important thing that happened to him in scouting, he said, "The summer I spent as a senior patrol leader of the service corps at Mackinac Island was the most important thing that ever happened, because during that summer, I decided I was not going to go into business, I was going to go into public service." So this is literally a service corps that created a president. Other ways that we support America, we have been the service corps to all the World's Fairs that were held in the United States, 1933, 39, 62, 64, even a couple of them in Canada, in Montreal in 67, and in Vancouver in 86. This was a great opportunity for the Boy Scouts of America to really showcase their ability. And it involved a lot of scouts. In 1939, it involved about 10,000 scouts on the service corps over the time period. And in 1964, almost 20,000. So this was a big event and a big ability in the BSA to show how helpful they were in service to the country. And we did a similar thing in state fairs. The longest serving state fair is in Indiana. We started in 1914 and it goes today. In Indiana, there's been over 15,000 scouts that have been on the service corps over that time period. Ohio, Michigan 1917, California 1925, Wisconsin 1930. So, and many of these have been long-lasting. Some have ended, but this is an excellent opportunity for the Boy Scouts of America to showcase themselves and also to give a nice experience to all of the scouts who have been a part of those service corps. And similarly, we have also served as ushers at many of the college stadiums for the football games. This has been going on, since in the late teens as well. In many schools, you're still doing it. Schools like Houston and Duke and UNC and NC State, Oklahoma State, Georgia Tech, and the added benefit for a scout is they do the ushering and then they have a chance to watch the game. So it's a nice little side benefit. And finally, We have what many people would traditionally call scout service, and that is in scouting's good term. The things that we do, like scouting for food, Project Reach, donor awareness, community service of many different types, and the safety good turn in 1958, other things. But at the end of the day, what it's important to focus a scout's attention on is this idea that service can also be a very personal thing, and where you can do simple acts of service. I often tell a story of a good friend who's a professor of sociology at the University of Arkansas. He's absolutely wonderful guy. He's been in scouting for 60 years, but he has the very fatal flaw. He likes to eat at McDonald's, and he can only go by himself because his family won't go with him, so he drives through. And he drives through and he places his order, and then he drives up to the window and pays. But before he pays, he looks in his rearview mirror and he sees if there's anyone else ordering. And if someone's ordering behind him, he will pay for that person too and go on. He's actually literally done this hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 15 years. Quite recently, he actually got excited because he went through and placed his order. He went to in the window, there was a guy in a truck behind him ordering. He paid for both. But this time he didn't drive all the way off. He actually paused. He was trying to get something out of his food bag, and his window was down, and for the first time he heard the interchange between the person at the counter and the person in this case in the truck. This is how it went. And the lady said, "You don't have to pay. The person ahead of you has already paid. Everything's taken care of. You don't have to worry." There was a pause, and the person in the truck then said, wow, and that's wonderful. I think I'll pay for the person behind me." It's the first time that, and then Dr. Briscoe had heard his simple act of service actually triggering someone else to do the same thing. And he wondered if, in fact, how often that had happened before. I'm certain it happened very often before. So we try to remind scouts that the important thing that they have to do is to look in their rearview mirror and to see if they can find opportunities for service that are unexpected, big or small, anonymous or known, but things that they can do for other people in an unselfish way, the same way that that's been done in scouting for the past 113 years. We also have highlighted the Eagle Scout Service projects. That there's a number of innovative projects that have been done by Scouts. It's a requirement, obviously, for the Eagle Scout rank, but it was first added in 1952 as a requirement in 1965. We have a number of examples of projects of the year where there was a STEM project that builds school seating, or an inspiration flag display, a fully accessible musical playground, or sensory rooms for kids with autism, even an exhibit to honor the heroes of D-Day, or a playground and meditation area for Women's Rehab Center. The extreme innovation in how Eagle Scout service projects are done, and that becomes a very, very important way of showing the value of Scout service. So service is the watchword. We think that it's time to put service at the spearhead of scouting, and have everything that happens in scouting prepare people to help other people. That's right in the middle of our oath, and it's